module 4. Where's the recording? All right. So module 4 kind of expands on what we've done in the past with risk management, and it really goes to layers of logistics and event control, staffing, other elements that come into play there. So the last part of the project, you started digging into the staffing element. Out of the 3 areas that you really hit on in the project this week, I'm going to be the most lenient on staffing just because we didn't cover it yet. But if you have different ideas out there, different, just want to make sure you have the base in play, and then that's one session that's going to be complemented more in the final project. And then event services and logistics really breaks down a lot of factors of vendor engagement, event registrations, timelines, and the actual execution of the event. The event services and logistics section could have been a mini textbook in itself on how to do. So definitely spend time to make sure that you have a strong understanding of that, before the class is a wrap. So for chapter 10, a big thing with event management, we got to understand who the stakeholders are when putting an event together. We've talked about stakeholders before. That could be the team. It could be a board of directors at a museum. It could be the upper administration for a major sports team. It could be city members. It could be people at Jackson College from the athletic department to central administration to put the thing together. So with all that, always got to understand who those stakeholders are. When it comes to building out the organization, or when it comes to building out the event, one thing that's very helpful in terms of the staffing control and setting up volunteers is creating an organizational chart. When you think about organizations like the Pistons or Jackson College, that is a significantly tall organizational structure. So what that means, there's supervisors over supervisors, everyone has specialized decisions, and there's just layers, and it's more of a bureaucratic process. Flat organizations are more along the lines of the type of groups that you're looking for in your individual project, where there's less levels of approval, where you own your specialty, where you have more of a outward voice, and other factors that are around that. So flat organization, think about like a local 5K ran independently in the Jackson area. More the tall organization would be a pro football team. When we look at the functional areas in the organizational chart and break down, regardless of if it's that full or flat model, the 5 core areas are operations. That's what a lot of the people that you see when you go to a sporting event, the security, the ushers, some of the service professionals along the ways. Competition, that blends into the facility management side of things, as well as those that are working on the physical space, the field, prep in that sector. Guest services, marketing, so that's more of the office administration side, and presentation for more of that technical engaging influence. When it comes to building out those areas and identifying the staff, there's some major things to consider. So, just for any event or any business, what is the type of event? Is this something that can be hosted internally? Are you going to need volunteers? Are you going to need contract staff? Think about the size, scale, the volume. When it comes to the destination, what other resources are in play? So when you think about Michigan International Speedway, when they host events, they have hundreds to arguably thousands, based on the specializations that come in with the vendors they work with, to parking services, to other people in the community that help put the event on through activations with sponsors in town and all that. So what all has to happen beyond the event itself or throughout the event that could require a larger scale of people to work with? Duration and time, functional factors. So, are there things specific to promotions versus specific to volunteers that come into play there? So with this, we got to think about the layers of staffing. So before, during, and after the event. So one of the biggest failures of a green event planner is the ability to do stuff in a timely order. And this really pairs in well with chapter 11 too. So when you think about when business has to get done, when do you have to put in orders for signs? When do you have to put in orders for t-shirts? When do you have to order food? So for a lot of events that have gone on for some time, this can be done weeks to months in advance. But if it's an event that you're putting on for uh, like a 5K in Hillsdale, you don't know what you're doing until tickets are sold. So with that, you might have more cost come into play for a late production of stuff. Um, Food vendors traditionally need to book months in advance, so they're not booked the weekend you need them. So there's different layers of early and just-in-time communication and deals just to make sure orders are being processed in a timely manner. When it comes to, so there's a lot of work on the front end of who you're engaging with and what staff internally are getting the work done to make sure the boxes are being checked. During the event, that's really one of the big areas we're talking about today, is what exactly is happening, who's needed, when are we needed, the day of, where are we needed, and who's part of the different decision-making processes. And after the event, fortunately, what I've experienced a lot of times at smaller nonprofit events, it seems like, everyone wants to be a part of the experience. Then afterwards, as volunteers, you don't get the population to show up and help. Or what you think about when you're leaving the Little Caesars Arena, think about this whole new wave of professionals that are coming from janitorial to other angles of customer service and sales, just to make sure the building's going to be good to go for the next day prior to the doors close, or before the facility shuts down. So a lot of layers with that. That's what leads to the outsourcing of talent, or the outsourcing of services and all that. So when you think about some of the stuff we talked about, like contacting vendors, for no matter what the event is, you can't do everything internally. You have to work with external businesses, whether it's working with contract security services to caterers. Like with Comerica Park, one of the things is like, who makes the food there? They work with a company called Delaware North. You might have heard Aramark. Aramark contracts with the prison system, or used to at least. But when it comes to the prison, when it comes to MIS, when it comes to the Tigers, all these teams, they don't have the expertise or the money to have a contracted full-time staff to do that. So that's where they have more of the specialized workforce for some of those service and production areas. But also, how are tickets being processed? Are you working with the site that handles that specifically? How are you working with partners that are going to be doing co-branding with you? So think about that. Some of the reasons to outsource, to complement what I just shared, it's like, just what can't you do as a team? What can't you do as a business internally, whether it's because of money, staff, whatever, that someone else that they're designed to do. So a lot of that could really cross over realms of marketing. Like, if you don't have a graphic designer, might have to contract with a company to have a graphic designer put some visually appealing content together. Helps save money, especially when looking to scale up an event, compared to having payroll go through you. It's a nice way to have more of a specialized account do it. Can be very expensive to recruit volunteers, to recruit a staff. So by working with the team that's trained to do that, makes it easy. And that's where you can bring in some of those technical expertise or in-house experience as well. And then when working with volunteers and third-party firms, that's a nice way that you can bring in mass to your event to accomplish things in ways that you don't have to go out there and hire them one by one by one by one. You work with the business, with a volunteer organization, probably pay them a significant rate to cover that, but makes it easier on you as a business at the end of the day. There are different so when it comes to that, it comes to when you bring in new staff, when you're engaging volunteers, the text talks about different motivational theories. I'm not even going to talk about those really. You're not going to, I don't think you're going to be quizzed on them. But with that, it's just good to understand some of the key motivational factors there, from, as a manager, as a event director, everyone needs to be communicated with in different ways. So understanding how to adapt with different personalities, understanding the benefits of why people want to volunteer for you, why they want to work for you. It's important to understand, just really think about those range of motivations. Similar to that, there's personal management and effective leadership styles. Really, the three different styles are trait-based, behavioral-based, and situational. Trait-based are when you hear that they're a born leader, and this person is going to lead based on their background, based on their family, based on whatever it is that kind of puts them in a position to be anointed, or trusted for that role. So you see a lot of that, in some organizations that are more family run or have fixtures from the community that, they've always done this next generation will succeed. Behavioral goes more onto the individual and kind of pairs with the situational leadership of how you adapt and how you engage and work with the consideration of your employees, with the community. So making sure that values exhibited, that people are being recognized, different factors in play here, just things to consider as you all grow throughout your academic career and become professionals. You're going to work with some bosses that just aren't great. They might be more of that trait-based format. They might not know how to communicate with others. They might be excellent on the business, finance, strategic side, but lack key areas in human relations. Going on from that, there's environmental factors that come to play. So you as young professionals, like how can your experience be impacted by things beyond your control? I've seen a lot firsthand, especially in the sport management realm, of massive cuts and adaptation taking place due to hits on because of COVID and the economy over the past year. So it'll be interesting to see as COVID, as we continue to battle through that, what are some of those changes going to be 2 years from now, based on how economies and how cities have adapted to the new norm that we're going through now, but also what are some of the implications that will stay here for the years to come. So that'll be an interesting area to watch. Talking about specific leadership styles in the mix, the transactional style, exchanges in which both the leader and the employer have this give-take relationship, how they work together. So when you think about, some rewarding things right when you break into the workplace, it's like, what can I do to impress the boss? How can, they gain this trust from me? And how am I going to get more out of this at the end of the day with more trust coming into play? The transformational style is more of a different approach, so more of a charismatic route, just kind of building rapport with the team. So areas to check out in the text. Don't want to take too time diving down those paths today. When it comes to the event prep process, it's also very important to have meetings. I think this past year has taught everyone that meetings can be effective in different ways. Most of the meetings that I'm at nowadays, and it's actually quite remarkable, there's always an agenda coming in. So compared to, hey, let's we have this weekly meeting, let's chat. Those have diminished in my work with a few different organizations, that if there's nothing to talk about, let's not waste each other's time. I think in the pre-COVID world, it's like, you have this weekly meeting because you have this weekly meeting, even though not everyone really had to be there. So when you think about, the scheduling of meetings with colleagues, when you're working with members in this class for your group project, when you're working, with your intern employer, always bring something to the table that you want to accomplish just to add value and to make sure that it heads with direction. I have seen such a foundational change in the way that meetings are structured because of COVID, that has made things more efficient in the way that business can be done in these times. That really summarizes that. On to the next, communication. So one of the biggest areas that I think I've but I've witnessed failure in are the communication structures prior to and during the event, when hosting large scale events. So think about how it's going to happen. How are you going to interact face to face or virtually or communicatively with your volunteers? Maybe they sign up through an employee volunteer opportunity at their company and they show up with 15 colleagues that never met you as the event manager before. How are you going to educate them ahead of time? Are you going to put webinars out? Are you going to do training videos? You're going to package some information. Very important to have a clear and trusted path to communication, whether it's a volunteer or internal staff, which is, I think that's one of the biggest areas that make a great event and dissipate, in an event that becomes a failure. Like if there's not much dialogue, if there's not much information prior to or during the event to help people feel comfortable in those roles, that is something that's noticed by the visitor. That is a challenging thing to overcome, especially if it seems discombobulated, even at the point of entry. Expanding more on volunteers, so this is something definitely to think about in your individual projects, but volunteers are a very, 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 very common entity when it comes to staffing of events. So when you go to major league sporting events, a lot of the staff that's serving the soda and concessions, that's preparing the food, they're volunteer groups. So compared to hiring this entirely new day-to-day staff that you need for special events, contracting with large organizations that can fill a quota of need, that's a very popular path for large entities. For small entities, what can you do to make things easier with this close-knit group? In parking, in concessions areas, in sales areas, in similar groups that can take care of processes in bulk order compared to you having to recruit person to person to person to person to make this happen. Now, of course, there are individuals that want to be involved in support, but as an event manager, working with larger groups, larger clusters are something to think about too. Another thing to understand is we got to figure out what groups do need volunteers. So every nonprofit, every youth sports team, they need money to operate. So thinking about reaching out to local sports teams to pick up the trash from a parking area or from a tailgate area, working with a band program to be scorekeepers at the event, working with the probation department of the city court. They have all these people that need volunteer needs, and kind of align things based on what their probation's for, versus types of activities is something the court system helps out just to make sure you get good volunteers on site. So a lot of opportunities to really attract larger crowds, but also you got to treat them as your staff educationally, training wise, and all that. And just thinking about some team building activities that come with this too. Volunteers enjoy contributing, so they got to make sure that they feel involved, that they feel trusted, and that they're placed at areas that align with their skills, their interests, and their ability to do the job. And all this is in the presentation to read in further depth on. But with that, feel free to use the chat if you have any questions on staffing, volunteer needs of Chapter 10, whether it's just in general, specifics about, certain organizations and how they do things differently. If it's about your event, if you have any advice, or if you'd like to receive advice on what I would do in certain scenarios of staffing, we'll give you about 15 seconds to use the chat, and then we'll move on from there to Chapter 11. And just for a little bit of scale too, I guess, when thinking about, so seeing a couple of the names on the call to give you a scale that I know different events work with in terms of staffing and volunteers in Jackson, if this helps with your event, to put on an event like the Gus Macker tournament that requires approximately 160 volunteers. That ranges from scorekeepers to security to setup to tear down to hospitality services. The Art Beer and Wine Festival, due to liquor laws, you have to pour beverages for nonprofits. You can't let a vendor pour their own stuff. The Art Beer Wine Festival requires 410 volunteers. 410 freaking volunteers to put on a tasting event in Jackson. That seems like, I don't even know what percentage that is of the population, but that is an astronomical amount. So when it comes to an event that has alcohol beverage control, there's seems to be, for small town events, always a substantial need. If you think about, if you're doing a 5K, a fundraiser, think about who's monitoring the water stations, who's working the registration areas, the assisting the judges and officials with timing, assisting with awards and ceremonies, parking. So 5Ks, from what I've witnessed, traditionally around that 50 to 70 volunteer mark throughout that. And that's just, for all those, that's just day of operations, not really including other things beyond that. If you're thinking larger scale, such as Michigan International Speedway and larger scale music festivals, volunteer forces could be upwards of 500, if not beyond, depending on how you're contracting different services, from parking to maintenance to directional traffic to food service, that kind of go from there. So on to chapter 11. So with this, we're going to spend this time talking about the logistics, ranging from financials to areas of sponsorship, day-to-day operations, and items of consideration to put the event on. And the funny thing about this section, like when I read the text, I'm like, why on earth why isn't this chapter 3? This goes a lot in line with the conceptualization chapter, but while conceptualization really is the phase 1 and the phase 2, a lot of this falls more on the phase 3 of the coordination of the experience. And when you think about your individual project, you're primarily heavy in, or should be heavy in, phase 1, and then bringing in phase 2 as we get underway, and then phase 3 is more that budget and the advertising section. So this is kind of how it aligns with that. We don't really get into the evaluation stage of the final project, but we do want to talk in your conclusion about, we share the budget, we share the goals. That's going to kind of help us understand what we're really striving towards. So when it comes to the logistics of event management, there's 2 big areas in terms of immediate revenue generation, and that's registration and ticket sales for many events, beyond the advertising and sponsorship benefits. So when you think about how you want to engage an audience, what is that mechanism that you're going to utilize to process the head count? So thinking about 5Ks, or if you're engaging in a youth sports tournament, there's traditionally a registration feature, which is where the waivers come in for processing, to get everything squared away, to monitor your account through some sort of third-party provider, whether it's Runjoy or Eventbrite. There's different ways to process that. On the ticket sales side, same way. There's a lot of events out there that do ticket sales the day of, but as event managers, having different clauses in place for refunds that helps safety net you in case there's like bad weather for an external event. So if you can put a heavy emphasis on pre-sale tickets that are non-refundable, or there's only refunds up to 14 days before the event, that's going to get money in your pocket regardless of what the conditions are. And then with on-site with registration and ticket sales, there's this mechanism technologically ahead of time, but what other vessels is it going to be through? Are you going to be utilizing Facebook, a website, whatever it is, for promotion? Once tickets are bought, how are they collected at the door? Are you scanning people in with the cell phone? Are you scanning people in through Square-based readers? There are other things to think about, both on the distribution side ahead of time and the processing side the day of the event, to ensure a nice fluid process. in your event as well, what's going to make sense for food and beverage. Every event's different. Most events have some food element, and something you might not consider for food is how you're feeding your volunteers and staff. If you're hosting a day-long 7-on-7 football tournament, you can't really expect your volunteers to pay at concessions. You know, it's being a volunteer, this is their time, shouldn't necessarily be their money as well in many instances. So think about on the front end, you know, what you could do to serve pre-plate or pre-packaged meals for a normal guest and event goer, but also things that you could do on the back end to enhance the experience of your volunteers, of your staff, your VIPs, and so on. So when you think about major sports facilities, like the Little Caesars Arena, yeah, they have all this food, premium price for the guests, easy revenue generation. They also have a chef in their cafeteria on the mezzanine level where all staff and volunteers can get food at an affordable rate. They don't just give food to everyone, but it's still this discounted, thing that they do at the major level. Just talked about that too, meals for participants, something to consider there for staff, players, whoever you're looking to enrich the experience of. And then with concession operations, something you could think about as well. So for many of your events in the class, what is that food service area? So if you're talking that a little league, or not a little league, a high school baseball team is going to be running concessions at your event. Well, are they going to have, if you're working at Ellis Sharp Park, are they going to be making hot dogs? So anytime you prepare food, whether it's a warming or cooling of it, you have to go to the local health department to get approval. So that's why you might often see someone selling Skittles or Gatorade, pre-packed, pre-wrapped, non-heated food at events, because that's the way around health department approval to have some revenue generation. Otherwise, if you think about a Tiki Sam's food truck or a Junkyard Dog or Crazy Cowboy that are selling taco street side, they do have licenses in play that allow them to do that. Also, something to think about depending on your venue, does that venue have distribution and contract rights for vendors? So a couple of you might be applying or might be hosting your events at Jackson College. Jackson has a catering service they use for on-campus events. So something you're going to want to do is figure out, do you have to use them? What are their rates? What's the leniency of working with the outside vendor? That's something that we expect in the research based on the style of your events in this, but also the group project if you are thinking about really adapting the food that is offered to the guests. A couple of the service areas to consider are for hospitality. What are you doing to enhance the experience of guests coming to town? So that's where the visitors bureaus can come into play to generate discounted rates on hotel rooms. So if you're looking to host a 5K on the streets of downtown Jackson, a obvious partner that I would encourage reaching out to would be Experience Jackson, as then you can reach out to the hotel and your participants can stay at that hotel that they partner with for a discounted rate compared to a normal festival goer in town or a normal person visiting town. But also when thinking about stuff for your sponsors, when thinking about value adds for in-suite services. All right, see you later. Having different enhancements that way. Always things to consider, some value adds that can be done just to provide a better experience for the guest, but also the donors and the sponsors to make sure they come back the following year. For waste management, think about different areas. So if you have water stations, if you have any dining area, how many trash cans do you need? One of the most disappointing things I see at events are companies that have festivals that have events everywhere, festivals that have trash cans everywhere, but it's like they check the box that they have the trash can, but no one takes care of it till after the event. And, when you just see trash all over the place, doesn't leave a good taste in the mouth of many guests. So think about the collection process with waste happening, well, one, prior to the event, after setup, just so you get garbage out of there during the event, and then after. So based on many of your events, you might be interested in reaching out to a company like Emmons Service, who loves to support community events in town and would do class or trash collection for free if it means that you're presenting Jackson or a park or whatever it is in a good light. So it's cool how different sponsorships and partnerships can stem for stuff like that. Working on the more industrial size, if you're doing an event at MIS, you're not getting, yes, you could get a discount for the weekend, but you're still paying some big bills for the amount of garbage that's going to leave that facility, from the tailgates to the camping to the plastic beer cups throughout the bleachers. For custodial services, just like waste management, comes hand in hand. That's something that I would recommend contracting out, just to make sure it's done in an appropriate way. And so you as a staff and event planning team, you don't even have to worry about it. Also, for transportation services, think about transportation on the outside and inside when planning events. So obvious things like if there's tour buses coming to town, if there's school buses bringing people from an area high school, where are they parking? Where are they pulling up? So a lot of events aren't, in Jackson area at least, aren't really designed to have buses come in and take over all the slots. So what else is needed for parking for them, tour buses, for school buses, tour buses, and so on. Also, depending on where your location is and what it is, what type of arrangements might be needed with local airports, with public transportation systems. If you're hosting an event in downtown Detroit, what is the impact of transportation if you're bringing 20,000 people to town with the normal flow of traffic? Is the queue line going to be accessible? Are partnerships going to be encouraged with Lyft and Uber? Different things to consider with that. But also inside, how are people moving within the event? Is there golf carts? Are there certain areas golf carts can go to move people around? For accessibility, what do you need to do to provide a platform, a landscape area to engage or to offer an equal experience with, for someone that might be restricted to you using a wheelchair compared to someone like me who can go free range, walk wherever they want? Big things to consider there. For lighting, that's more on like the production level of stuff, but also for safety. What's the lighting like outside your venue? Who's in charge of that lighting? So often you see multi entities on contracts when it comes to the upgrading of facilities and lighting between the city, between the tenants, between the vendor, just to make sure it is a safe, well-lit experience inside and out. So that's where you see other partnerships come into play. For vendor relations, this will likely be the most complex layer of your budget. Just thinking about who all you're going to have to write checks to, who the contracts are with, who's bringing, like I said before, the portable toilets, are you going to have an exclusive pizza provider? Are you doing stuff with different catering services? In chapter 4, it does have a nice little budget, but I would highly, highly, highly recommend you look at festival budget examples online, just to look at the different intricacies that come into play when it comes to some of those contract relationships. The nice thing when you do have outside vendors, once they come in, it's the liability in many instances lands on them compared to you. So if you were to go to an event and order undercooked meal from somewhere, based on many contracts, you could be out scotch-free, even though you had this vendor there. They violated some federal health code principles, so they're the liable party compared to you. So that's what's nice compared to having to take everything into your control. Other things to consider: restroom facilities. So fun fact, with the Art Beer and Wine Festival, we traditionally just had we thought we had enough restrooms over the years. We had basically 12 stalls between men and women between the planetarium, the galleries, and the community room for the guests. Well, when we go from 2,200 guests in 2014 to 47 the next year, when you don't have porta potties, that's a problem. So that was what I would consider to be, in my time with the museum, our biggest failure. We didn't adapt appropriately in all the areas that we should have, for appropriate restrooms. Now, the funny thing is, we did bring in additional restrooms, but no one wanted to use porta potties because it was a classier event. People wanted to have air conditioning. So then you bring in air conditioned units. So it's funny, what comes with events, what's acceptable. Standard portable toilet versus air conditioning. Who's taking care of that? Big things to consider at small scale to large scale events, understanding how consumers are going to use what's provided and really evaluate what isn't. Think about the traffic flow inside and outside of the event, the impact that it's going to have on restaurants around, safety and well-being of all that. For seating, what seating is provided? Is it fixed? Is it flexible? Is it going to be imported in, and all that? Think about the impact of sound. If one big thing to consider for all the events that you're planning, there has to be a mechanism in place in case an emergency were to happen. So if you're hosting a 7-on-7 football tournament or an indoor basketball skills competition, that's easy. You have a freaking PA system at the facility you're using. But if you're doing a 5K and all of a sudden some Looney Tune were to drive through your barriers and run over someone, how are you communicating with people to evacuate the area or to avoid this? So think about unfortunate things that could happen. How are you communicating this event out as your event continues to spread out? That can be a very expensive and challenging issue. So that's where it goes back to the previous chapter about staff communications. How are you balancing out police officers, security volunteers? So there's communication channels everywhere. If you fall short on a centralized or connected sound system to spread word if word needs to be spread. Hotel availability, I already talked about that. And the final two things to consider with the logistics, there's lots to consider. This could be a book itself, but what you're doing throughout the event to enhance the experience of the guests, what service functions are available. Are there other enhancers that can be done compared to just the sole focus of the event, just to make sure they remember the experience they had when visiting. And then for award ceremonies, this is kind of a funny one that was tied in the text with this section, but this is very applicable to all your events. If you don't have an award ceremony, that's cool. But looking at the list of who's in this meeting, many of you will need medals. Many of you might have trophies. Many of you could have random prizes or different giveaways. So what types of things are needed to create that platform for delivery? What's the cost of that? All things to really think about as event planners, just so you're planning out in, an appropriate time frame. This goes back to the early stages of logistics. What is happening when? So with that, I don't have any additional content from chapters 10 and 11.